we have to start thinking about the complexity of the system. But also, I think the Griot folks would know that the truth is many of those folks are blaming because this is Baltimore and this is America.
As you know, cities across the nation, including Baltimore, are seeing an uptick in crimes. We see robberies taking place, hijackings. That's a big thing now with Uber drivers, residential break-ins. What do you think is the cause, the root cause of these crimes?
Listen, the truth is that there is no one root cause of crime. It stems from another factors. And folks, anyone that tells you they know what the exact cause of some simple act, whether it's a violent crime or not, that they know what that one simple act is caused by one simple thing, it's not, because every single act of violence and crime is very complicated. It's about many things here in Baltimore. It's about the systemic disinvestment, a lack of opportunity, blight in our communities, an absence of conflict resolution skills, and of course, easy access to firearms. Every single part of it matters, but everything together leads people to be ignored or disregard the value of lives of other human beings, and permits them in their minds to resolve petty disputes through gun violence, right? And we have to understand that we have to hold them accountable, the people that are pulling the trigger. For me, we're also going to hold the folks who are trafficking those weapons, and even have to start having the conversation about holding the manufacturers accountable as well. And with the pandemic putting all these extra pressures on everybody, you're seeing violence rise again. We aren't going to be able to undo decades of disinvestment, neglect, harmful policies in overnight, but we are going to enact coordinated, highly intentional, highly focused, and impactful solutions to address all the problems that our cities face. That's why I announced last summer our first ever comprehensive violence prevention plan, which is about three things: creating sustainable outcomes for our residents, approaching violence as a public health issue, which it is, and that means treating the root causes too, and coordination with other law enforcement partners and agencies and our communities.
I want to touch on something you mentioned earlier. Baltimoreans, as we know, have been victims, like you said, of redlining, lack of resources, especially when it comes to schools, discrimination in the face of housing and job employment. Can you just give a example for that person who is unaware of what people experience in Baltimore and why sometimes they resort to doing unlawful things?
Well, I never make excuses from anyone. There's no excuse to harming someone else or taking someone else's life. But if you live in a city that literally created redlining, it was first passed in this building and took around the country, and that neighborhood that you live in has faced decades of disinvestment where there were no capital improvements. You weren't getting your street fixed. Your school didn't have heat in the winter or air conditioning in the summer, right? The transportation system wasn't built so that your parents could actually get to a job in a quick way, a good paying job in a fast way, and being able to help you. You also had to deal with that outdated public transit system to get to your school, and you were late. When you're talking about all of those factors, the educational factors that we see here, when you're living in houses that folks were allowing you to live with lead paint and lead pipes and the health things that come from that, when you don't have access in your neighborhood to healthy food, but there are 5 liquor stores on one block, it creates an environment that breeds that kind of activity, right? I grew up in one of those in Park Heights, and I'm blessed, myself, my family, many of my friends, that we chose to do the opposite. But we didn't have some of the same struggles. We didn't have parents and family members struggling with addiction, which actually takes more people in Baltimore than gun violence, and 3 times over. We lose thousands of people to overdose, and no one talks about it because folks are afraid, unlike I am, to talk about the substance abuse challenges that we have, not just in Baltimore, but in this country, and how we have to start treating it in a different way. There's a reason why other countries don't have overdoses, because they have smart policies and programs like overdose prevention sites that we need to bring to the states. All of those factors tie in. When you talk about laws that were preventing Black people from moving on certain blocks and having the ability to do other things, all of that ties in. And then when you now have readily available guns and all of these things that just magically appear. Like I was talking about last week, we in a recent count, we had seized 800 and something guns that came, 50 guns that came from other states, but only 500 and something that came from both from Maryland, and most of them from outside the city because Baltimore has no gun stores, right? And if I live in West Baltimore and I can't get to Trade Point Atlantic or the Port of Baltimore by public transportation to work, I sure as hell know I didn't go to Georgia to buy that gun. Someone brought it here and put it in the hands of these individuals, and we have to get to that too.
What do you say to those critics who are blaming you literally for every crime that takes place in this city?
Well, I think first, listen, heavy is the crown, right? We know that people are going to blame whoever's in charge, right? When gas prices go up, they blame President Biden, right? That's what the nature of folks do. But I think that we have to evolve, especially when you understand that Baltimore has had violent crime issues longer than I've been breathing, right? So if I was born into a city that was really more violent than it is today, right? When we think about the 90s, then we have to think about how there has to be personal responsibility in folks that are doing that. But also what I like to talk about is collective responsibility, right? Blaming someone who literally co-led the largest anti-violence movement the city has had, 300 Men March, where me and my brothers were the only ones who were committed enough to go out and walk and stand on those corners where those shootings were happening at 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. It's something that folks should think about. And when you blaming me for not just the violence, right? But I think actually it's important. Like when the police department goes and arrests someone for murder or something like that, and that person gets back out or they get released early, and the folks will say, well, the mayor and the police commissioner and the police department isn't doing their job. Well, we have to do a little bit better job of telling folks that, well, actually, the enforcement portion is my responsibility. But once the police make that arrest, it actually goes over to the state. The state obviously does the courts with our new fabulous state's attorney. Our governor controls corrections and jails and juvenile services and social services and things like that. And the judges are at the circuit court level are elected too. We have to start thinking about the complexity of the system. But also, I think the griot folks would know that the truth is many of those folks are blaming because this is Baltimore and this is America. When looking for a scapegoat, blame the Black person, right? Because folks aren't screaming at the state of Maryland saying, well, the state of Maryland failed this case, so this person got let out early. When people go to court, they're not going to court the city of Baltimore versus, they're going to the state of Maryland versus, as you very well know. We have to start talking about the complete public safety system here in our state and in our city, and not just thinking about one thing. I'll take the blame for the stuff that we're responsible for. But one, people are responsible for their own action. And we as a community have to also build that level of responsibility about what we can do as individuals working with our communities to make them safer too.
Switching gears, last year, the nation was paying attention to Baltimore City because a motorist was killed by a squeegee boy. So can you talk to me about squeegee boys? How did they come into play?
We're in Baltimore City, the largest city in the wealthiest state in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. Yet 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old boys have to go out and wash windows in order for their families to survive, in order for them to eat. That's what we're talking about here. Folks like to pin this in squeegee, but it's really about, they should really call them poverty boys, because that's what it is, right? That's the truth. Whether it's, as one young man told me that, his mother has challenges and he meant substance abuse and he has to help out. He got to take care of his siblings, right? Or for some of them who actually work full-time jobs, they don't pay enough and they're out there to help boost their finances, or whether they're just doing it as a side hustle. So that's why we put together this squeegee collaborative. And early this year, I brought everyone together: business, leaders, nonprofit leaders, city agencies, government workers, young people that squeegee, former squeegee workers, community members, to develop a working action plan, developed to address this issue and implement sustainable solutions that balance alternative opportunities for young people that squeegee with constitutional and fair enforcement to say the buck finally stops here. The plan is not going to immediately end squeegee works as much as the very highly intelligent air quote folks at Fox 45 will think will happen, but it will go further and do more than what's ever been done.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for your time. Is there anything else that you would like to add that we didn't cover here?
No, ma'am. Thank you very much.